Hi there, today we will discuss why increasing tire pressures will reduce the likelihood of having front left tire failures of the type that we saw last Sunday in the F1 race at Silverstone, and the setup consequences of increasing the tire pressure. So a quick recap, last Friday I made a video on the car setup needed for Silverstone, and I predicted that keeping the front left alive would be a challenge due to the fact that the optimum setup compromise for Silverstone was to shift the weight distribution as far forwards as possible in order to be able to use a very slim rear wing despite having a very high downforce level overall. This combined with the large number of very fast right-hand corners means that the front left tire really gets hammered. And then I never expected that it would be demonstrated in such dramatic fashion in the last 3 laps of the race when first Bottas, then Sainz, and then Lewis Hamilton all had failures in the last 3 laps of the race. So in order to cover this topic properly and for you to understand it, we have to first quickly go over how a tire is constructed. So a tire is a very complex product. Tire companies spend millions developing tires, although they might all look just black and round. In fact, they're actually quite complicated products. A tire is made from multiple layers of rubber and reinforcement material in order to give it its shape. The strongest parts of the tire are the tread. So the area of the tire just below the tread has many layers of reinforcement, and the same is true of the where the tire is mounted to the rim. There, around that part of the tire, there's what's called a bead. So it's just a steel belt, which helps keep the tire attached to the rim. And there was quite a cool video made by Driver61 on YouTube, where he cut through an F1 tire, and in his video he also showed how the bead was one area which was very hard to cut through, and you can also see the reinforcement around the bead going up to around this part. And also below the tread was where there were a lot of reinforcement. So in the past, I believe Pirelli used steel belts, but nowadays I think they shifted to Kevlar following the failures they had in the 2013 British Grand Prix. And the very flexible part, and also the part which I believe was failing in last weekend's race, is the tire sidewall or the shoulder. That is the part of the tire which is the weakest and the most flexible. So just to explain, tires will deform and slip when generating some force. When you're just driving straight, braking or accelerating, the tread is quite well aligned with the direction of travel. So the wheel heading is the wheel path, but then that completely changes during cornering. The tire carcass is completely deformed, and the direction of travel is not in line with the wheel heading anymore. So and this deviation in the actual wheel path with where the rim is pointed, that is the definition of the slip angle. And the relationship between the force and the slip angle is affected by things such as tire construction, the rim width, the pressure you put in the tire, and so But important to note, so when generating a lateral force, the tire also has to deflect vertically. So as you imagine, if you increase the pressure inside the tire, then it's harder to deform the rubber. Because when you deform the tire, the volume inside decreases. You can test this yourself if you just pump up your tire, your bike tire, harder and you try to press on it. You will see that if you increase the pressure inside the tire, it's more difficult to deform. And even Formula 1 tires deform, as demonstrated by this very famous photo taken of Nico Rosberg going through Degna 1. Here you can really see the tire deformation at the tire shoulder. So this is what's happening to the tire, and so you can imagine as a Formula 1 car is navigating, say, the quick direction changes of Silverstone, the tire is just getting deformed in one direction and another direction. And so, if you think about that, that is actually very similar to, say, if you take a safety pin and you're just bending it back and forth, and at some point, due to the material fatigue, it will fail. So the point is, the more you allow the tire to deform, and the more often you deform it, the higher the likelihood of failure. So so by increasing the pressure inside the tire, then the tire will not deform as much, and as a result, you don't get this stress failure. So increasing the tire pressure will solve the tire integrity problem, but it could lead to some setup headaches for the engineers dealing with car setup. The reason is the tire pressure strongly influences the relationship between lateral tire force and tire slip angle. And the slip angle at the front and rear axles determine the oversteer and understeer in the vehicle. And so if we make the thought experiment that the setups were completely optimized last weekend, and suddenly the teams are forced to run higher pressures than before and relatively higher front tire pressure than rear, then by increasing the tire pressure from, say, optimal, the tire contact patch becomes a little bit smaller than before, and then the peak lateral tire force is reduced. However, in the linear region, so before reaching the peak lateral tire force, the force buildup happens quicker. So meaning a higher cornering stiffness for the front axle. So a lower limit for the front lateral tire force, but it builds up faster. So this makes things a little bit complicated, because it means that qualifying and race handling balance are going in opposite directions. Why is that? So first, let's take a look at some temperature considerations. So in qualifying, for sure, the drivers will be absolutely maximizing their usage of the tire, getting the tire to the temperature where there's peak lateral tire force available for the ultimate lap time over one lap. However, that's not what they will be doing in the race. So in the race, the drivers will be underdriving the tire to conserve the tire life, because you don't want to be making pit stops every few laps, which is what would happen if the drivers were pushing to the max every lap. So in order to get the best possible race time, they have to actually underdrive the tire a little bit, keep the tire a little bit cool, keep it alive for a little bit longer. So sacrifice a little bit of lap time each lap, but keep the tire alive for much longer. Which, in terms of the tire curve means they will be in the race mostly spending time in the linear region, whereas at qualifying they will be trying to drive right at the peak of the grip curve. So what does that mean? During the race, if you have relatively increased the front tire pressure more than the rear, the car will understeer less or oversteer more, and that might be a problem for, say, Ferrari, which gambled on using quite a thin, slim rear wing to compensate probably for the loss of engine power from last year to this year. So that could be an issue maybe for Vettel, because he lost a lot of track time last weekend due to various mechanical issues with his car, and so could never get comfortable with the handling balance. Most probably quite a lot of oversteer in the fast corners. So for the teams which had a relatively oversteer balance, that the mandating higher front tire pressures will lead to even more oversteer. So, but for the teams which had cars which were understeering, that's in race conditions, it's actually a good thing. But then for qualifying, because the limit of the front is reduced, then rather than oversteer, you have understeer at the limit. So actually the easiest way to solve it is just to increase the rear tire pressure by the same proportion as the front, so that you end up with the same characteristic for both. Yeah, so that you retain the same balance as before for both the qualifying and the race. Because if we think about solving it any other way, if you try to solve it for qualifying, so say you reduce the front anti-roll bar stiffness to give the front tires more grip by reducing the amount of load transfer at the front, that will work for qualifying, but then you will have even more oversteer in race conditions, or the other way around. Like if you try to increase the front anti-roll bar stiffness relative to the rear to get the car balanced for race conditions, then in qualifying you will have a lot more understeer than otherwise. So the whole point is, yeah, it's not an easy job for the engineers, and I expect the route most will take is to just increase the rear pressure with the same proportion as the front. However, it could be that there are more creative solutions out there. If you can think of one, please leave them in the comments below. Hopefully the video has been informative. If you liked it, feel free to also check out racetracksetup.com, my website, and enjoy the race. Till next time.